Senate Armed Services Committee will be there. And Senator, thank you for your time before we get to that hearing. Here is John Campbell, the general from yesterday on this.
We have now learned that on October 3rd, Afghan forces advised that they were taking fire from enemy positions and asked for air support from U.S. forces. An airstrike was then called to eliminate the Taliban threat, and several civilians were accidentally struck. This is different from the initial reports, which indicated that U.S. forces were threatened and that the airstrike was called on their behalf.
Yeah, you obviously know that's about the hospital in Kunduz in northern Afghanistan. What do you need to understand from the U.S. commander today, sir?
Well, Bill, you've been in war zones, and you know that first reports from the front are often or even usually wrong. General Campbell and I met yesterday. He assured me, as he will at a hearing today, that there are 3 different investigations ongoing. No one feels worse about this terrible tragedy than General Campbell and the troops underneath his command. We want to ensure that we understand all the facts and that we try to do the very best we can to put procedures in place to stop this kind of incident from happening in the future. But let's be clear. Yeah. It's the Taliban's presence in Kunduz that ultimately is responsible for the deaths of these innocent civilians.
You are keeping your powder dry until you hear from him. That's what I hear from that, right?
It's important, again, in a war zone, you often see the fog of war, and that's why we have investigations after the fact of things like this. I've seen them at a much lower level as well. The Army is very thorough, as will NATO and the Afghan government be. We'll get the facts, and we'll try to do the very best we can to stop this kind of thing from happening in the future.
And we will certainly listen for the headline from that hearing, and it will be critical. The report about leaving 5,000 more U.S. troops in Afghanistan through 2016 ultimately puts 1,000 troops in that country at the end of the president's second term. Are you okay with that?
Well, I think 1,000 troops would be far too few. They'd be able to do very little besides guard our embassy and other compounds in Kabul. If we actually are going to have an effective counterterrorism strategy, we're going to have more troops than that. 5,000 is probably too few, but it's much better than 1,000. And if we actually want to continue to provide the kind of combat support to the Afghan military to support our efforts in Afghanistan over the last 14 years, we probably are going to need more in the order of like at least 10,000. Remember, Afghanistan is the one place in the post 9/11 era from which we have ejected Al-Qaeda and to which they have not returned. It'd be a terrible thing to squander that victory. As we're increasingly seeing in Iraq, we've allowed Al-Qaeda in the form of the Islamic State to come back in to get lands that we once controlled.
10,000, considerably higher than the White House wants, as you well know. Move further west. There's a report that Russia is willing to hit ISIS targets inside of Iraq, which would be in addition to what they're doing right now in Syria. If that happens, what should we learn from this?
Well, Bill, it's one of the oldest, most bipartisan, most well understood, and least contentious U.S. policies that Russia should not be a power broker in the Middle East. And unfortunately, because of Barack Obama's years of appeasement and concessions towards Vladimir Putin and his desire to cut and run from the Middle East at all costs, Russia is increasingly becoming a power broker in places like Syria and Iraq. Even our allies like Israel are now having to go to Russia to coordinate their policies for their national security. I think this is a very bad sign of what's to come over the next 16 months of this administration.
Well, we're going to get a bit more on that through analysis throughout the morning here. Just one more topic here. You are holding up 3 ambassadorships, the nominations to be ambassadors, pending an investigation and further action with the Secret Service. What's the rub here, Senator, and why now?
Well, we learned shocking news just last week that armed agents of the executive violated federal law to intimidate a congressman from doing their job. Congressman Jason Chaffetz chairs the committee that oversees the Secret Service. During a hearing in which Chairman Chaffetz was conducting oversight into Secret Service lapses, agents began to pilfer their files, which contained criminal and security and personnel matters, looking for dirt on Chairman Chaffetz, and then they leaked it to the media. The executive branch needs to take this much more seriously than they have. We cannot have a situation in which agents of the executive are trying to intimidate members of Congress or senators of either party from doing the work of the American people. They have to take this much more seriously. There needs to be a criminal investigation, and there has to be appropriate disciplinary action taken.
It's a serious matter. Senator, thank you for your time. We'll watch all that, and thank you for all the topics today. That hearing begins in a matter of moments. Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bill.
Martha.